A very good evening to all of you, and welcome to the 24th National Conference of NHRDN. In this session, we are going to talk about HR professionals turned entrepreneur. Now, this is a very unique session. This is a fireside chat about HR professionals who have turned entrepreneurs, and this session will be moderated by Dr. Rajesh Chandwani. Dr. Chandwani is an associate professor in the HRM area at IIM Ahmedabad. He is also the chairperson of Academy of Human Resource Development. He is fellow of IIM Bangalore. Previously, after completing his MD Pediatrics from Baroda Medical College, he has served as pediatrician in public health institutions in rural and urban areas. He has wide-ranging interest in the HRM and technology issues and challenges in the service sector, of course, specifically in the healthcare sector. Particularly, current research interests of Dr. Chandwani include use of IT to enhance the effectiveness of healthcare personnel and healthcare delivery. He has also special interest in mindfulness-based strategic decision-making. Now, without any further ado, I would request Dr. Chandwani to take over and proceed with the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranav, and I hope the audio video is clear to everybody.
Yes, sir.
We have with us Mr. Ajit Isak, who is a veteran in the field of HRM. He started his career more than 2 decades back and worked with various companies in private companies in HR roles, different HR roles, and then he joined and built Quest Corp for past 12 years into the largest private sector employer within a span of 12 years. And under his leadership, Quest has seen the growth from an IPO which was subscribed more than 140 times. And we know when we get the allocation status, all of us would have been disappointed, most of us actually, seeing the ratio. And he also has seen the industry evolve over 2 decades. So interestingly, more than 2 decades, the Indian industry sector and also the HR, because it is related to the industry, has evolved tremendously. And we would begin, Isaac sir, with overview of how the industry evolved, especially when we talk about post 1991. What are the changes you see over the evolution of human resource management as a field?
Thank you for a warm welcome, Dr. Chandwani. Coincidentally, my career began in the year 1990 as a management trainee in Godrej and Boyce in Vikhroli. And 1991 was when the liberalization process started. So as a professional, I got to see have a ringside view, so to say, into how the economy was changing and the employment scenario itself is changing. If you look at 1991, India's GDP was about 266 billion then. And today, it's about close to 3 trillion, 30 years later. And our FDI then was only $132 million. That's about the amount of money that comes into one single large investment in a private equity round today. And that was the size of the FDI in those days. It went up to about 5.3 billion in about 95, 96, and to a much larger number today. A GDP growth rate was about 1.25% on an average per annum for about almost 30 to 35 years since independence. And that, after liberalization, became about 7.5%. And today, we saw even 9.6% in 2006. So that's a scale of influence and change that the liberalization process drew. In that process, there were 4 or 5 industries that really came out of it. There was telecom, banking, retail, insurance, etc., for which the opportunities opened up. The government loosened the regulatory system, and we had new companies that emerged in telecom, banking, retail, and insurance. Along with that, in the late 90s, we had the Y2K projects. And those Y2K projects developed the opportunity space for the IT industries in India. So companies did Y2K projects, and then they moved on to enterprise projects after that, and thereafter to Web 2.0, and then after that to the Internet revolution, and then to the SaaS-led and cloud-led projects that we see today. So these were the industries that drove employment in India. And these were the industries that had no legacy, no baggage from the past. So, opportunities for HR outsourcing mushroomed in this space. And it is there that companies like Quest grew, to be able to outsource and to provide manpower and to provide services in the HR space for the emerging sectors of the economy. And we grew, with from 2000 to 2020 today, we've grown to become the largest private sector employer with about 425,000 people that we employ. We have revenues of about almost, shade under $2 billion. So we are a mainstream organization. So HR outsourcing today, it cannot be considered sort of one of those supply side initiatives which are regional in nature, or let's say restricted to one particular line of service. It's now a mainstream employment source in India. And in fact, today we are ranked in the top 100 in India as an organization. So that itself shows that HR as an industry has achieved a certain critical mass and can now look up from here.
I think a very interesting thing you told about HR outsourcing and how it has become a mainstream. And the Quest was born as a small baby, and now it has grown up to such large level. But what is the role of technology, say internet or AI, in this process, and how technology and AI is influencing the HR domain, and what opportunities it can create for HR professional as entrepreneurs?
That's a great question, actually. Technology at one level helps to manage change. Technology at another level causes the change also, because of the nature of its disruption that it can impact. So I think in that sense, it's important to see what are the sort of changes that have come in the HR space and the employment space, in the last, let's say, 20 years. Initially, all employees were working only on site. So even if, let's say, IT companies were doing a project for General Motors in Detroit, or let's say with Amazon in Seattle, they would send people to work in Seattle. And then after that, we had the offshore revolution, where offshore centers were set up here. So large telecom pipes helped to shift data up and down, as a result of which people could work wherever they wanted. So it was not necessary to work on site. And with the growth of further technology capability of these organizations, they could shift work centers from on-site to offshore, to even work from home. So you found people now having to develop. You can meet programmers today who will say that they've never gone to office for the last 2 years. They've constantly done all their work from home. So what's evolving is actually a pattern of something like this. About 50% of the workforce is now beginning to work almost full-time in office. About 30 to 35% is a hybrid structure, where they come in a little bit of the time into office, and then they work partially from home, visit client offices if required, go for project meetings to client locations, do site visits if required, do project launches outside office. So they do maybe a combination of 2 days out, and about 3 days inside their own homes. And then about 15% or so of the workforce may not go to office at all. So that's a sort of huge change that's happened, and technology has had a big role to play in causing this change and in managing the process of this change. The second change that's happened is that employees today have a choice of how to work. What is the nature of the contract? Do they want to work on a perm basis? Do they want to work on a temp basis? Or do they want to deliver a job on a gig basis, on a task basis? So as a consequence, therefore, from where you work and the nature of your contract have now been changed perpetually. Consequently, also how you get paid will change now. Is it going to be paid on a fixed plus variable, or just a variable, or a task-based output? So the combination of these three things is a sort of very large paradigm shift in the way an employee-employer relationship itself shapes up. And technology manages a large part of this, because platforms gather information about tasks, platforms connect demand and supply, platforms enable the assessment of the quality of the jobs done, platforms enable also the payroll and the salary payment, and also the settlement of regulatory and compliances requirements as per law. So this is basically the impact of technology on jobs, the framework of employment, and how people are paid. Dr. Chintamani.
Yeah, and suppose if I want to say how it has affected the view of HR as an entrepreneur. So HR person or a person in HR area, how technology or AI has affected my entrepreneurship possibilities?
So entrepreneurship actually flows out of solving problems that society has, or enterprises have. So entrepreneurs are problem solvers, so to say. So if, let's say, there's a problem in urban transportation, Uber and Ola grew in that space to sort out the problem of urban transportation. Similarly, in human resources, the three main problems of human resources is fit, flexibility, and friction. Fit in terms of finding the right guy for a job. Does he fit the job? Is he an approximation? Can he grow into the role later on? Or can we, take a management trainee and then put him under somebody else, mentor him and grow him into the role? That sort of situation. Flexibility is some of the things that I spoke about, a few minutes ago. How do you want to hire him? Do you want to hire him on a perm basis, temp basis, or on a gig basis? Do you want to pay him also on a fixed variable or gig basis? So that's flexibility. And friction is, in employment, there's always some sort of friction because you're dealing with human beings. There's emotions involved, there's regulations involved, and there's also an asymmetry of supply and demand at all points of time. There are never equal points of supply and demand. So to manage fit, flexibility, and friction is actually the job of HR entrepreneurs. That's really the core of this. But outside this, I think there are certain fundamental issues in the Indian economy, so to say, which I think HR entrepreneurs should look at. The first thing is that 12 million people join our workforce every year, which is almost about 1 million a month. That many jobs, may not be available. So we have to see how best to connect the demand and supply and create a market making model where access to talent is available for companies that need this talent. The second thing is that uh, unemployed, previously unemployed people is almost about 53 million people in India, 5.3 crores. So it's a large number, and that's a societal issue. So if you reflection of this will be seen in the railway. Recently, we had a railway job that is advertised for. There were 35,000 vacancies, and then we had 1.25 crore applicants for that. So 1.25 crore applicants represents almost about one-fifth of the total unemployed base in India for one job, for one set of jobs. And therefore, if you really analyze it, can be a larger number. So upskilling these people and finding jobs for them is another problem that entrepreneurs can look at. The third is that female workforce participation is abysmally low. It was about 26% in actually 2005. It's dropped to, people say even below 20% post pandemic. That means only 1 in 5 women who are capable of working in India are actually working. And that's a big impediment to the development of our GDP, because if one half of the workforce, only one-fifth of them work, it's difficult to push the GDP up. Also, it compares very poorly to other developing countries. If you take Bangladesh today, it has 30% labor female workforce participation, or even about 34% in Sri Lanka. So India has got to get the female workforce participation up. HR entrepreneurship in these areas to promote diversity and to help female workforce find jobs I think, will be one with terrific impact. Another thing is that the need for compliances in India is very, very high. The number of labor laws, etc. So to ensure compliances take place is again, and to ensure organizations remain completely compliant is a big opportunity area. Lastly, migrants constitute a large part of the workforce. If you take a total workforce of about 230 million or so, migrants are about 120 to about 130 million, and the provision of facilities for them, the connection of jobs to all of them, and to ensure that social benefits are getting distributed to all of them, and the movement of their living, of their character from informal to formal is, I think, an important aspect of the HR industry. So these are the areas where I think opportunities are available for HR professionals. Lastly, and I think that is an area that you've been alluding to, Dr. Chandwani, is the role of technology in all this. Technology ties a lot of these things up. For example, applications will be able to connect demand and supply. There are, job boards like Naukri, Monster, etc., which connect people and to jobs. Second one is enterprise applications, which are the HRIS space, managing workforce, engaging with them, etc. Third is payrolling services. We have to, as more and more come into the informal sector, from the informal sector, they have to be paid benefits. Their retirement benefits has to be accounted for. So HRIS, along with a payrolling service, is key. And lastly, there's a huge need for background verification services, because there are many shifts happening in the employment sector today. There's a shift happening from rural to urban, from farm to non-farm, from the industrial to services, from the informal to the formal, and finally from the unbanked to the banked sector of the economy. Through all these changes, the need for background verification, data analysis, etc., is key. You can't. Nobody can underemphasize, therefore, the role of IT in all of this.
Yeah. I think one more thing which you highlighted is when these things are changing, we know the acronym VUCA, but I think gig work and all of these things are also creating, and COVID now is also creating a lot of stressful situations, or in general stress and anxiety and burnout amongst the employees. And I know this comes from my medical background, और वो बीच में से उभर के आ जाता है that medical. But I think one thing where HR also can play a role in through technology or otherwise is managing the whole changing scenario of this excessive stress or burnout or anxiety related to these changes like VUCA, gig work.
It's a very under focused area of human resources. Actually, human resources in the emerging paradigm will have a larger role to play in public health situations, because in work, while they're at work and they are a participant in the workforce, if anybody has got impact creating capability on workforce in terms of health outcomes, it's really human resource professionals. By creating policies that create better working atmospheres, by identifying and diagnosing where you've got issues of mental health. Post pandemic, the long COVID situation is under researched and under reported. So you find a lot more people with fatigue, with blackout suddenly, and with also odd type of body pains. So in physical activities which are involved in many jobs that people do, they could have impediments. And to provide the right kind of medical support is a human resource responsibility. And I think HR professionals do well to first educate themselves on issues regarding public health, policies of public health, and what sort of organization initiatives they can drive to better health outcomes of their workforce.
I think both organizational and beyond, because now person may not be an employee of the organization. So as
true,
you said, it is flexi and outsourcing, all those things. And I think one more thing which we have talked about, problem solvers, HR people as seeing problems and solving problems, and that's where the entrepreneurship discourse talks about. But when we say HR professionals, most of the HR professionals will be working for organizations. And does entrepreneurial mindset and not entrepreneurship, can it help HR people to function better in an organization in this situation?
So, previously, about 20, 30 years ago, HR professionals were mostly oriented around implementing rules and ensuring that there was compliances in everything that they did. Today, that's gone out of the window. I think a HR professional should be an entrepreneur in many ways. First of all, finding talent. In such a talent deficit situation, to be able to creatively go out and find the right type of people requires an entrepreneurial outlook. Somebody once told me that the three most difficult jobs in the world, or three most difficult sales jobs in the world, were selling insurance policies, then selling second-hand cars, and the third one is being a recruiter. So the three were the most difficult sales jobs in the world. So, you need to be creative. Entrepreneurs are problem-solving folks. You need to be thinking on your feet. Finding people is one such. The second thing is, how do you make commercial successes out of changing, patterns of employment, changing contractual systems, and how do you marry the organization's economic goals with people-related issues? And that, I think, requires creative thinking. It needs people who understand business, who understand why a service should be delivered in a manner that is done. How do they concentrate on increasing margins and creating more value for a shareholder? So these are thoughts that cannot be set aside for any HR individual anymore.
Yeah. I think, as you said, it is very important for, as many people have written on the chat also, that it's very important for continuous learning. What I could gather very well is, like a cryptic story, there is always positive, that is opportunity, and there is always negative, lot of work to do for HR people in general. And as one more thing, and we have you, Quest Corp, who is not only looking at the people side but also looking at the employer side, what do they need, and the relationship also. So you have seen all the three dimensions, like employer, employee, and the relationship. What do you see the changes from the employer perspective, and what does it add to the entrepreneurship opportunities for HR people?
So, there are quantum shifts in this. The first is that, as an example, my father, for example, he worked in one company all his life. He had one boss, one job, and one car, and maybe one wife all his life. All of that has changed now for young professionals, so to say, where they changed maybe an average of about 6 jobs today in a career span of about, let's say, 30 years. So the number of jobs you do itself has changed. Second thing is that many people today take breaks between career options. So, in a manner of speaking, it's not a continuum of employment that people have got anymore. They sometimes take breaks, and they come back to work, etc. The third thing is that compensation is a different. If it's a different game today. It's not. There's ESOPs. There is wealth creation opportunities within a company. All of that contribute to a compensation package that's very different from what it was in the past. So the relationship is changing. Previously, the employer-employer relationship was a master-server relationship, so to say, and that is no longer. While by law it can still be a master-server relationship. I think by practice and by pragmatic thinking, it's more in terms of a partnership between employee and employer. As soon as employers realize that the core of the company is really people and not the physical assets that it's got, and move out of the master-server relationship model, I think that's when the battle begins to be won. And progressive organizations that work at higher margins, using a lot of technology, have global scale operations, have imbibed a lot of this very early on. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why they've all changed. The older organizations in the sort of industrial economy, and where there are legacy issues, they find it difficult to come out harder out of this. There's still long-term settlements, LTS as it's called, collective bargaining, and issues related to trade unionism. So it's not that workers' rights should be suppressed, but while workers' rights are protected, we also have to start thinking of productivity, and also in terms of how to increase average levels of economic output per person.
Yeah, so I think when we look at HR people employed in corporates, they should be very well aware of the new laws which are coming, say new labor laws or new wage code, and how they should respond to these changes, which will, and how entrepreneurial mindset will help them to respond to these changes in a better way.
So the new proposed labor codes are a must for India's progress. I think it's a question of when, not whether we must implement them. Maybe the pace at which it should be implemented, or the sequence in which they should be taken, is a matter of discussion. And with the industry discussions, I think we can reach some sort of a consensus in terms of how to take it forward. So the wage code should happen, and because the definition of various issues under various laws in India are not contiguous. So you'll find each issue being treated differently, and it becomes a nightmare for compliance officers. So I think it's important that we get that right. The second thing is that along with wage codes, we should also implement minimum wages. Minimum wages in India have languished for a long time, and we are not increasing this. We are big backers of increasing minimum wages. We think that as companies' productivity goes up and profitability goes up, some of it should be passed on to employees. Also, one important thing to keep in mind today is that in the post-pandemic period, a lot of companies have cleaned up balance sheets, profitability has increased, earnings are much better today. a lot of the fat has gone out in companies. So productivity is really going up. I think now is the time to also attend to minimum wages and to ensure that wages represents enough for the body and soul, not just as a pay slip that goes to employees.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we have only 5 minutes left, so we can take one question maybe. Yeah, so I can rephrase one of the questions where we have talked about employer and employee, and maybe the relationship between them. How about, and you told that there are a lot of workforce which may be ready for employment but may not be work ready or employer ready. Is there an opportunity for entrepreneurs to go into that domain where you work with the educational sector or apprentices? That was the specific.
Yeah. So I think skill development is a essential part of this whole conundrum. And unless skill development picks up again, India is going to face a huge backlog in terms of people. So two things have happened in this space. One is that because of the pandemic, the skill centers that were opened by the government in association with private sector remained closed for 2 years. And the government is yet to change the law regarding skill development to be done digitally instead of being done physically. So once they do that change, we hope skill centers will open up again and skill development will start. The second thing is that Manrega is a big influence on this. As Manrega still stays in, you'll find more and more people taking the benefit of Manrega and not necessarily going for skilling. So the government should find some basis by which we're able to move people out of Manrega and more into skill development programs, and from there on into employment. The third aspect is that companies should be incentivized. Companies should be incentivized to take more and more of such trainees. So we have an existing provision of income tax on 80JJ benefits. We hope that continues, where if you take some people on to work with you for a period of time, then you're given a rebate for 3 years instead of the 1 year that you discount costs for. So these are the ways by which I think skill development will take place. But HR professionals can find a lot of opportunities in working with corporates to find an upskilled workforce at higher productivity levels for organizations.
Okay. Thank you, Ajit ji, for such an insightful discussion. We talked about historical aspects, how the things have changed, business view ka, regulatory aspects, technology, and how these things are changing in general the view of HR. But specifically, we wanted to understand how these changes create opportunities for HR people as entrepreneurs, and also HR managers, how the entrepreneurship mindset, if they develop, they'll be able to manage the corporate HR roles better. I think the discussions can go endlessly, and given your experience and the overall insights, we would love to continue the discussion further. But fireside chat hai na, so fire extinguishes after some time when the oxygen is low and we have time as oxygen. And Pranav has come and said, "Aapka oxygen cylinder khali ho gaya hai. There is no time left." So let us close. But I think we can continue discussions like this, which will be very interesting for all HR people as a fraternity, whether we want to become entrepreneurs or whether we want to develop entrepreneurial mindset. I think if we want to revisit Dave Ulrich's model and 4 roles, this is the time when we need to do that and include this entrepreneurial mindset into that somehow. Thank you, Isaac ji.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ajit sir. Thank you, Dr. Chandwani. Right from history of how HR has evolved to the future of the new labor codes, this session almost touched every aspect that an HR professional goes through. I am extremely delighted and thankful to our panel members, and I request all the participants to please join us in the next session, which is scheduled at 5:30 on talents and rewards. Thank you so much.
Thank you.